Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on youth who are on their own, supporting unaccompanied students. This is part 2 of our Back to School webinar series. If you were with us for our Back to Basics, welcome back. And if this is your first time with us in this series, hello, we're happy to be here with you and that you've made a little bit of time to talk about this very special population. My name is Ana Sofia Treyes. I'm a K-12 Senior Program Manager here at Schoolhouse Connection, and I am joined today by my colleague, Karen. Karen, you want to just say hi, introduce yourself?
Afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Karen Rice. I'm the Senior Manager of Education Initiatives at Schoolhouse Connection.
Amazing. And we have some lovely panelists today who are going to talk a little bit about what they're doing in their district to support unaccompanied homeless youth. But before then, we'll go through a couple more slides, talk a little bit about the law before we hear from our panelists. So just want to start with a general housekeeping slide. So just a reminder for everybody that this webinar should last an hour. We typically get a ton of questions when we do kind of our larger webinars, and they can get a little bit lost in the chat function on Zoom. So we ask that if you do have any questions, to please put them in the Q&A box on your control panel in Zoom. It's easier for us to get to them. And if we can't get to them in this webinar, we'll review them and find a way to get those answers back to you after that. The other thing I want to highlight here as well is often folks have a lot of questions about very specific situations that they may be navigating in their districts, and we totally get it. We know identification is high, you know, that's the season where everything is coming at you, but we might not have time to get into all of those nuances in today's webinar. So just a reminder about that. Again, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but we may not be able to get into those specific situations. This session is being recorded and you will be issued a certificate of attendance for today's webinar. And last but not least, we do have a Schoolhouse Connection community on Zoom. This is a really great space to just ask any questions that you may have to peers across the country who may be navigating similar situations. So really, really encourage you to sign up for that if you have not already. And then just going to do a quick introduction of Schoolhouse Connection for folks who may not be familiar with us. We are a national nonprofit organization that works to overcome homelessness from prenatal to post-secondary. We do that by partnering with a variety of folks in the field, providing strategic advocacy and practical assistance. And really, we believe that education is the key to breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness. We have a variety of resources on our website, including resources for folks who are implementing the law. We have awareness posters, and we obviously host webinars like this, including our webinar archive. So if you've missed any of our back to school series, you can go back and watch those earlier webinars. We're very involved in federal and state policy advocacy, and we have a youth leadership and scholarship program where we not only support our young scholars with financial support, but also case management support. So the best way to stay informed on all things Schoolhouse Connection is just to sign up for our newsletter and be sure to get those updates into your inbox. And just to kick us off here, want to talk a little bit about our agenda for today and kind of where we're headed. So hoping that you all will walk away understanding the definition of unaccompanied homeless youth as defined in the McKinney-Vento Act. We're also hoping that you all will be able to walk away with a review of educational protections for unaccompanied homeless youth under the law. And last but not least, again, we have some lovely panelists here who are going to share some practical strategies about how they're supporting their unaccompanied homeless youth and perhaps how you might be able to replicate some of this in your own districts. And with that, typically when we do some of these webinars for unaccompanied homeless youth, we'll do a quick data slide, but we figured that this time might be a little bit more fun to engage you all and hear a little bit about what you all think about our data and take some guesses here. So if you were with us last time, you probably remember that we talked about identification data in school year 22-23, and 1.37 million students nationwide were identified by their schools as experiencing homelessness. And now we want to hear from you all, if you all could indulge us and guess what percentage of those students were identified as homeless in school year 22-23. And launch that poll. I see some responses coming in, but I'll leave it open for a little bit longer. everyone has had morning coffee or afternoon coffee, because I see those responses coming in hot and fast. Give it another minute or two, or another couple of seconds here. Looks like most folks have answered. So I'm going to go ahead and just end the poll. And the majority of folks said 9%. And that makes me really happy, because I'm hoping that means you all love our data profiles, because that is the actual answer. So 9% is the answer for that question as well. So thank you all for indulging us there and participating in our poll. Okay. Again, it seems like some of you may already be familiar with our Schoolhouse Connection data profiles, but just want to remind folks who may not be familiar, this is a really great resource for you all, especially as you're thinking about your own identification practices. We often tell local educational agencies that this is a really good point of reference. So you can look at what's happening in your state, what are the trends for identification for all different kinds of students, specifically unaccompanied homeless youth, and determine where your district is comparative to what's happening in your state. That's a really good place to start to kind of get an assessment of where you might be. If your data is very, very low, or perhaps you've never identified an unaccompanied homeless youth, that might be a really good time to look through your identification practices and think about what you might do a little bit differently to make sure you're identifying those students. So again, really great resource here. Whoops, sorry about that. Get this back here. Sorry about that. So now that we've talked a little bit about kind of data, want to talk a little bit about understanding youth homelessness. So often we will talk to McKinney-Vento liaisons who have a lot of questions about unaccompanied homeless youth and the situations that may lead to their homelessness. And similar to kind of what we talked about last week when we talked about understanding homelessness for families and children, so just think about the fact that that for unaccompanied homeless youth, the reasons for experiencing homelessness may be very complex and may be interrelated. So there's all sorts of reports that talk a little bit about some of these reasons, ranging from things like severe family conflict, there may be a history of family homelessness, or there may be some kind of family separation that led to that scenario. If you do find yourself in a situation where you've identified a student and perhaps you hear from that parent or guardian that that student is welcome back home whenever they want, that is not indicative that you have done something wrong, but can also indicate that there might be something that you're not seeing under the surface, right? If there's some sort of abuse happening or some other thing that's preventing that student from returning home, that could be a really strong reason for them to not return home and continue to be identified as an unaccompanied homeless youth, depending on the circumstances. So again, just a reminder that all of the reasons are complex, and it may take a really long time to get a full picture of what's happening with our unaccompanied homeless youth. The other piece that I'll highlight here is that often we get a lot of questions about the age range for unaccompanied homeless youth. There's nothing in the law that states that an unaccompanied homeless youth has to be a specific age, or they can only be a teenager. They can be a student of any age. And we do frequently see circumstances in which our younger students may be outside of the physical custody of a parent or guardian and experiencing homelessness. So again, just something to keep an eye on there. Okay. So now that we've talked a little bit about kind of data, the causes of homelessness when we're thinking about our unaccompanied homeless youth, want to shift into thinking about the law and just the specific laws, or the specific rights that are outlined for our unaccompanied homeless youth. Again, if this is your first time joining us, want to make sure that we talk a little bit about just kind of the definition of homelessness more broadly. So the McKinney-Vento Act does have a specific definition for a homeless child or youth. And that definition is children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about these scenarios, can the student go back to the same place every night to sleep in a safe and sufficient space? So again, when we're thinking about fixed, we're thinking about, is this place stationary? Is it permanent, not subject to change? When we're thinking about regular, we're thinking about whether or not that place is predictable, someplace they can use on a routine basis. And when we're thinking about adequacy, we're really thinking about whether or not that space is sufficient to meet the physical and psychological needs typically needed to be met in a home environment. So for example, if you're working with with a student who tells you that they had to leave the physical custody of a parent or guardian, and then they are living out of a car, for example, you would know that that is not a fixed living situation, right? A car is not a fixed pace. They might need to move it around. And so that could be one example of that. Again, that's a very black and white example. There are all different kinds of examples that you may run into in your work, but you really want to think about these three pieces. And the last piece I'll highlight here is that not all three need to be true at the exact same time for a student to be identified as McKinney-Vento eligible. Often McKinney-Vento liaisons may be caught up on one of these pieces, but it really just depends on the circumstances. So just something to keep in mind that if one of these pieces is missing, you want to make sure you're doing your due diligence and finding out all of the information before making that determination. And now that we've talked a little bit about just the definition of a homeless child or youth, want to talk specifically about unaccompanied homeless youth. So the law does include a definition, and the law, which is a homeless child or youth who is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, and they have to meet the definition that we just covered, which is lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. If these two pieces are not true, then that student would not be identified as an unaccompanied homeless youth. So just want to remind folks that these two pieces must be true for that identification to be made. I've kind of alluded to this a couple of times, but want to remind folks again that every determination should be made on a case-by-case basis, and that's absolutely true for unaccompanied homeless youth. Not all students who are living apart of outside of the physical custody of a parent or guardian are considered homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act. There's all sorts of examples, but I'll just point to one, which is we've heard situations in which a parent perhaps has a job that requires them to travel a lot, and they may have an aunt or an uncle who stays with that child while the parent is away for work for a set amount of time. There's no economic hardship. Once the parent is back from work, they're able to pick up their child and return back to their permanent housing situation. That situation would not be considered an unaccompanied homeless youth for all of the reasons that we just indicated. Their housing is fixed, regular, and adequate. There's just an arrangement that's been made because of a work situation. And so again, I want to remind folks that not every situation meets this. It depends, but that is just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about eligibility. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karen.
We wanted to take a minute to talk about our unaccompanied youth and our immigrant youth. We know that when we talk about unaccompanied and we use that word unaccompanied, that sometimes there's confusion between our unaccompanied students who are unaccompanied in their immigration status and who are unaccompanied in their McKinney-Vento status. And so we wanted to just take a minute to hopefully clarify the difference for you and just kind of talk through the similarities and the overlaps as well. So wanted to just first of all talk about our unaccompanied minors. The legal term is unaccompanied alien minors. I personally strongly dislike that word. I won't use it again after this, but we wanted you to kind of have that because you might see that in different legal spaces. But an unaccompanied minor in the immigration status is a youth under the age of 18 who comes to the US without a parent or legal guardian. So of course, the term unaccompanied in this case refers to that immigration status. And so these students may be on their own, they may be placed with a sponsor. And so we really wanted to just highlight the difference between again, the unaccompanied in their immigration status and unaccompanied in McKinney-Vento, but really want to encourage you to think about it like a Venn diagram. And so if you're familiar with the idea of a Venn diagram, you've got two circles, one of immigration status, one of McKinney-Vento status, and those two circles overlap. And in that overlap space is where we see our immigrant students who are unaccompanied in their immigration status and unaccompanied in their McKinney-Vento status. Many times our unaccompanied minors who are newcomers or who are immigrant students in the United States, they fall into that overlap area where they are also eligible under McKinney-Vento. McKinney-Vento is something that those students have access to, so immigration status does not make any difference for being identified under McKinney-Vento. And then I also wanted to just highlight that oftentimes we get the question of, what about students who are placed with sponsors? Our immigrant students, our unaccompanied youth who are unaccompanied in their immigration status, are placed with sponsors. Does that automatically make them have fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? And the answer to that is no. The process has changed over the years of how that sponsor is able to take in a youth. And so there is no guarantee of fixed, regular, and adequate. That is the hope and that is the aim of those situations, but it is absolutely not always the case. And so we really want to look at those situations on a case-by-case basis, exactly what we would do for any youth who came in who is not staying with a parent or legal guardian. And so just wanted to highlight that for you. And also to say that we know that many of our newcomer students who are newly arriving or who are unaccompanied in their immigration status, there's really a lot of fear and kind of unknown, maybe trepidation about that McKinney-Vento eligibility. They may not want to say what their situation is. They may not feel comfortable saying that in front of the sponsor. And so it's really important that we are getting to know those students. We are building relationships and building trust with those students. We're having conversations apart from that sponsor so the youth feels comfortable sharing. And then again, making sure that we're looking at all of those on a case-by-case basis. So there may be reasons why that youth is not in an actual safe space with that sponsor, and that McKinney-Vento support is really, really crucial. So we wanted to just take a minute to highlight that difference, but knowing that youth can be unaccompanied both in their immigration status and in their McKinney-Vento status. So any youth who is identified under McKinney-Vento has access to educational protections. Now, if you happen to join us for our 101 that we did last Wednesday at this time, we talked a lot about the basic protections under McKinney-Vento, and the same protections are true for our unaccompanied youth. So they have the exact same protections as any student who's identified and is experiencing homelessness with their parent or legal guardian. And so for our unaccompanied youth, this means they have access to immediate school enrollment without a parent or legal guardian to sign anything, without the documents that are typically required for that enrollment. Our unaccompanied youth have access to attend either in their school of origin or their school of residence. And one word of caution that I want to offer you about helping with that school selection decision is to really make sure, particularly for our older youth, that they understand the implications of one school over the other. And so what I mean by that is, if you're working with an unaccompanied youth that says, hey, maybe I'm going to go enroll in the resident school, the school where I'm staying right now, looking at those graduation requirements, looking at that progress toward graduation. What would it mean to transfer schools? Would those credits transfer? Would that student be short of credits? And really helping our older students in particular to see all of that information to make the best decision that they can with that guidance from the liaison. Our unaccompanied youth, of course, have access to transportation to and from that school of origin. And they also have access to the dispute resolution process. So if there are disagreements about eligibility, about school selection or enrollment, our unaccompanied youth have access to that process, and the liaison needs to help walk through that process with unaccompanied youth. Another important piece for our older youth is really thinking about that college readiness assistance. And I know for many liaisons, and myself when I was a liaison, we are not necessarily experts in that college readiness preparation. And so those partnerships with school counselors are critical to help provide this support to our unaccompanied youth. So thinking through college visits or career opportunities, helping that student plan, helping that student to see themselves beyond graduation and really providing the support for whatever they need to get to whatever their plan is after school. And then also providing that verification for FAFSA. So if you're interested in learning more about FAFSA, I know we have a couple of webinars that are coming up specific to supporting students with FAFSA, but our unaccompanied youth need to have that verification that they are unaccompanied to be able to complete their FAFSA as an unaccompanied student. We, of course, want to make sure that our students have comparable services to access their education. And our unaccompanied youth also are eligible for Title I Part A services. And so, again, thinking through how you're using your Title I Part A funds, what supports that student might need, and how you can meet those needs with your Title I Part A homeless set-aside funds. Our unaccompanied youth have access to free school meals, again, the same as any student who is identified under McKinney-Vento, and then also to have all of those barriers removed. So we know in particular our unaccompanied youth face many barriers to accessing their education. And so it's really important that we're looking at what are those barriers and how can we support students to remove those barriers. I mentioned a couple of educational protections that I want to just particularly highlight. So when we're thinking about, again, that idea of school selection and enrollment and getting our unaccompanied youth in school, we have to give priority to the wishes of that youth of where they're going to attend. Now, again, it doesn't just, we don't want to just have the youth say, okay, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to transfer to this school. We really want to have thoughtful conversations and provide all of the information to that youth or to their caregiver so that they have the best information possible when making that decision. But of course, giving priority as the law requires us to do. And again, I mentioned that dispute process, but I just wanted to highlight that because I know a question that we receive a lot at Schoolhouse Connection is, what happens for when there's a disagreement with an unaccompanied youth? And sometimes there's a hesitation to allow that youth to dispute that eligibility or enrollment or school selection. And so unaccompanied youth have access to that dispute process. And it's really important for the liaison to be supporting and walking them through that process. And then finally, I just want to again mention some of the barriers that our unaccompanied youth face. Our unaccompanied youth face so many barriers to accessing their education and to making sure that they have what they need to be successful in school. Now, the law requires that as liaisons in our LEAs, we're looking at reviewing and revising our policies and procedures to remove those barriers, particularly for our unaccompanied youth. And so if you have not ever done that and you have not had the opportunity to look at your policies and procedures, I want to encourage you to get a seat at the table to make that happen. I know that I hear from liaisons practically every day who say, I'm not the policymaker. I don't get to write the policies. I don't get to do all of that, review and revising. But you can be a seat at the table to look at those policies and to say, this is how these affect our youth. This is how we can remove those barriers. And so it's a great opportunity to advocate to say, hey, this is in the law. We need to do this. And I need to have a seat at the table in these conversations. So as part of these policies, I would also encourage you to really look at your procedures and kind of how those two things intersect. And so our procedures, of course, are driven by our policies, but looking at what does that enrollment procedure look like for our unaccompanied youth. If a student shows up to enroll or a young child who is unaccompanied shows up with a caregiver, what does our process look to identify that child or that youth and to get them in school? Do we have something in our policies or procedures that talks about allowing someone else to sign in place of that parent or that legal guardian? So maybe it's you as the liaison. Maybe if it's an older youth, it's the youth themselves. Maybe there's a trusted adult that has agreed to be a caregiver or what we often call an educational guardian that doesn't give legal parental guardianship to that person, but it gives someone an opportunity to really provide that support and take responsibility for that child's education. So what does that policy and procedure look like in your LEA? You may consider adding something like a caregiver form. I know many LEAs have what they would call an affidavit or a power of attorney or some kind of caregiver form that they use. I think it goes by many names and many LEAs. But thinking through what is that document that you can have someone sign to have in your school files that says this person is taking educational responsibility for this unaccompanied youth. Now, again, it's not a legally binding document. It doesn't give parental rights or anything like that, but it's a way to have something in your file that says, yes, this person has agreed to take responsibility. Maybe they're the person calling in absences. Maybe they're the person signing a field trip form. And just to kind of have that on file for that youth can be a really important step in that process. And then finally, I want to encourage you to think about how your unaccompanied youth are accessing and participating in extracurricular activities. We are required to help our unaccompanied youth to do that if they're interested in that. But I really want to encourage you to think about what that process looks like. And so if you enroll an unaccompanied youth who says, hey, I want to participate in band or I want to participate in theater, instead of saying, great, the theater room is down the hall, or you can go after school on Thursdays and connect with this person, actually taking the initiative to connect that student, to walk that student down to the music room, or to connect them to the advisor of a club or the teacher in charge of that program, and really being intentional in helping those students connect rather than leaving the onus on the student to do that. We can really take an active role in that to make sure that our youth have access to what keeps them interested in school. And we know for many of our youth, it's these extracurricular activities that really support their engagement and attendance at school. All right, Anna Sophia, I'll turn it back over to you.
I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat, and I want to make room for our panelists because I know we're going to have a lot of questions for them. But I did just want to go through a couple because I think that they're important to kind of address as a whole. One is a question about a youth who lives with their parents, and there's a pattern of being kicked out for weeks or months at a time. Do we think that those would meet the requirements for identification as an unaccompanied homeless youth?
That is a great question. So we know many times with our youth that particularly if they are kicked out of the home, they may have the opportunity to go back. They may try to work things out with their parent. They may go through a cycle where they're kicked out and then they go back home and then they're kicked out again. And so if at any point during the school year that youth is lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and is apart from their parent or legal guardian, they need to be identified. Once that identification happens at any point during the school year, that student continues to be eligible under McKinney-Vento for the remainder of the academic year. Even if they end up going back home and staying there through the year, they're still eligible under McKinney-Vento. They still have access to all of those protections and services and supports. So if at any point they're apart from their parent and they are lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, then yes, they do need to be identified.
Thank you, Karen. There was another one here too that I'm going to go ahead and just answer as well, which is about unaccompanied minors who have enrolled themselves and whether or not they're able to excuse their own absences or sign themselves out of school early. And so I want to just say that for a lot of these kind of policy questions, it's a really local decision about how you handle this. Karen just started to talk a little bit about caregivers authorization forms or other things that can be used in this circumstance. But as, again, Karen mentioned, the law really does require the removal of barriers. And so if having a caregiver's authorization form becomes a barrier for that student to be able to participate fully in school, either excuse or sign for their absences or any kind of other thing, then that barrier would need to be removed. So again, it's a very local decision. It just kind of depends on the facts. But again, just a reminder that you want to make sure you're removing those barriers. So that piece. Okay. Without further ado, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can hear from our lovely panelist.
Great. Well, thank you for having us here. My name is Kelly King. I've been the McKinney-Vento coordinator for the Kenai School District in Alaska for 18 years now. Joining me in this office will be Nicole Murphy. We'll be kind of shuffling the computer screen back and forth, but she is our youth support specialist. She's been in this role for 6 years, but with our district for 11. In addition to the district level work that we do, we also sit on the homeless education advisory team for the state of Alaska. Supporting homeless unaccompanied youth is a great passion for both Nicole and I. We are always intentionally looking at what are the most meaningful opportunities and supports that we can put in place for these students. And so during our time in this presentation, we are going to share kind of a wide variety of things that we're implementing in our district and the practices and policies that we have put in place. And so we will get rolling from there. let's see. Maybe. There we go. Just for reference, obviously Alaska is a very vast landmass. The circled portion on the southern peninsula is our district. That circled area is larger than the state of West Virginia, but it is just a singular school district. I can't tell you how long it takes to drive from end to end because many of our communities and our 42 schools are only accessible by boat or plane. I just wanted to point that out in terms of the services that we are offering in the Kenai. I think for us and our staffing, like most of you, it's a very small staff. There's only 2 full-time staff members and 1 half-time person on the Eastern Peninsula. And so as we are trying to provide services, we do obviously get a little spread thin, but I think one of the most relatable facets of any McKinney-Vento program, regardless of where we are in the country, is that we are never overstaffed. So as we know, as Karen and Anna Sophia mentioned, there are many reasons why young people don't just come to us and tell us that they are unhoused and on their own. And so because of that, we know that we have to make additional efforts to identify these youth within our schools. And so in our district, we do put a very large concerted effort into training all of our staff on McKinney-Vento Act, as well as the practices that really help best support our unaccompanied youth. And so first of all, we do have an online training that is required for all school staff, regardless of position at the beginning of every school year. Custodians, special education aides, classroom teachers, all the way up to our superintendent are required to take this. There's no way that us as liaisons can identify all students on our own. So it's so vital for us to have those eyes and ears in every single building that can, with their own unique relationships with students, help be referral sources for the program and the services that our youth are eligible for. Nicole and I also offer site level presentations at every one of our 42 schools where we talk about the identification of homeless unaccompanied youth, their rights, best practices in supporting them. And as they mentioned earlier, that there is no lower age or grade threshold for unaccompanied youth. That often throws a lot of our elementary schools off because we generally consider those to be teenagers, but we do point out that it doesn't have to be. And through these staff trainings, we have seen a great increase in our referrals. We think that when staff at buildings can put a face to the program name, when they encounter situations that they may need to refer to us, it helps make those connections and keep it kind of in the forefront of staff's mind. These trainings are also a great opportunity to make sure everyone is aware of our policies and practices within the district, like was mentioned. When students want to enroll in extracurriculars, students in our district can fill out the participation paperwork for themselves. They can fill out the travel forms for themselves. And then our program comes into play to provide the items that are needed for participation, whether that be reeds for clarinets or headgear for wrestling. Another policy that we have in place in our district that's important for school classroom staff to know when we're doing these trainings is that if an MVP McKinney-Vento student misses 3 days of school, that they are required by district policy to reach out to us so that we can check and make sure that the absences aren't due to their housing situation. And then if they are, it gives us the opportunity to kind of intervene and kind of mitigate those absences from continuing. We also provide targeted training to high frequency support staff within our district. And so for our nurses, counselors, and school secretaries, we often attend their target staff training in services and again, provide information to them. They're often the first ones in the school building that will notice attendance or academic or transportation concerns, and they often become our main points of contact for our unaccompanied youth. Again, with just making sure everyone is on the same page with policy and practice. All of our front office secretaries know that if a youth is to show up on their own and says that they are unhoused, then that school enrolls immediately and without delay, and then reaches out to us to follow up with that student to do the needs assessment and kind of clarify all of that information. But we do make a concerted effort here with McKinney-Vento Act full participation in school from the moment that they enroll. And so there isn't a delay or a hang up of trying to figure out if the student's housing situation is qualified on their end. They immediately enroll and then leave it to us to kind of figure that out. We have also attended open houses for schools that we felt were maybe under identifying unaccompanied youth. And so we had tables set up with information about federal programs in general, but specific information also about unaccompanied youth. And so as students and parents came by in that open house, And we had conversations, multiple interactions resulted in referrals from someone that a kid was like, oh, my friend is in this housing situation, or parents saying, we've actually had our child's friend staying with us for 2 months because something was going on. And so multiple referrals came to us that way. And then finally, in terms of trainings, we also offer numerous information delivery opportunities for our community, especially with places that have a high frequency of interacting with our youth. So that could be everything from the Department of Juvenile Justice to our local tribes school-based programs. But a big part, we believe, in identification of our unaccompanied youth is that awareness and outreach component. And so we do spend quite a lot of time dedicated to those activities within our district. Another thing that we have done, both Nicole and myself have attended for multiple years, the district-wide student council meetings that our district holds every year, where student leadership gathers together. And so we do targeted talks about unaccompanied youth, but we also really use them to teach us as well. We ask them questions about their peers who are unhoused, such as like what happened with them in their situations that we may need to know about. What should we be looking out for? What are these students' greatest needs? What might keep them from telling an adult in their school what is going on with them? And so we know that youth are the experts about other youth. They're going to know things that are happening much quicker than we ever will. And so we really use them as a resource. The other thing that has come out of these events with the student council have been student-led support projects for our program as another way to support youth in their schools. So the picture on the top left is students sorting change for a penny drive that they did, which resulted in a $700 donation to our program. The top right was a student who made many blankets to hand out to our youth. And then the bottom picture, 2 of our youth actually held a birthday party, but instead of presents for themselves, asked for people who attended to bring food cards, sleeping bags, and hygiene products for us to hand out to our youth. And so kind of a multifaceted way to support. We're learning from youth, we're having them bring our information back to their friends and peers. And then we're also seeing these really beautiful projects that are coming out of it from their peers. Kind of bouncing around a little bit, but for those of you who have seen the generic posters about McKinney-Vento requirements and all of those things, they're not super youth friendly. And so when we decided to revamp ours, we went straight to the source and we asked a panel of unaccompanied youth what they would like to see on a poster and what would engage them more to stop and actually look at what it was. And so the first thing we asked is what should go on the flyer. Their response was a very clear list of living situations that could count in student-friendly language, as well as a clear list of exactly what we could actually provide. I think a lot of the feedback that we got, students felt like people are always saying they can provide things, but they never actually see anything coming out of it. And so they wanted to know, what are you actually going to do for us if we call you? And so we included that. They also wanted to see QR codes, again, because they didn't want to have to read a whole poster and have that be obvious to their friends. So the QR codes were an easy way for them to just scan it as they walked by in a much more discreet and respectful manner. And so we implemented those as well. We asked them what the QR codes should bring you to. And so their suggestion was a social media account, didn't matter which one, but something that they could go, they're comfortable with that platform and get more information. And then the other one was a direct link to my email so that if they had questions later on, they could instantly contact without having to look for numbers. Also, a lot of our students aren't comfortable on the phone, right? They're like texting or they want to email or something that isn't so vulnerable. And so that is the other QR code that they can access there. And then finally, we asked them, where should the flyers be displayed in your school and community? And so their feedback, as you might imagine, was bathroom stalls or outside of the counselor's office where all of the other posters are already hanging. The reasons that they did that was because complete privacy, right? Again, they're not having their peers or anyone else watching them and wondering, why are you looking at this poster? And then in the counselor's office, everyone's already there reading all this other information anyway. So it's, again, very discreet form of them to reach out to us. I'm going to transfer to Nicole for this next slide.
So with nutritional support, we know that one of the biggest things we focus on is making sure that our unaccompanied youth have consistent access to food. Because let's be real, empty bellies never made better learners. And we're very passionate knowing that in that hierarchy of needs, we just want to make sure they have as much nutritional consistency as possible. So we, if the youth choose to apply, we can walk them through a SNAP application, and that's Alaska's food stamp program. I don't personally fill out the form for them, but I work with them and sit alongside them to answer questions and make it a learning opportunity. I also have worked with the leadership at the Alaska Department of Public Assistance to streamline the process for just unaccompanied youth. And now liaisons across the state use it, and it's even highlighted at our statewide McKinney-Vento conference. We also think about long breaks because for many of our students, as you know, school meals are their main source of nutrition. Our local borough union employees step up every year to adopt families and unaccompanied youth, and they fill the gap by providing food for the entire break and not just the holiday meal. And then finally, we made over 300 bags of shelf-stable food at the food bank last year, and those were available to our unaccompanied youth as well as those youth that were not with or that were with families. The project was a result of a local church writing us a grant, and our superintendent and one of our head secretaries from a school who are passionate about our students spent 2 10-hour days helping Kelly and I assemble the food kits, and then her and I both personally delivered them to our homeless unaccompanied youth.
In that last slide, you heard Nicole mention partnerships. And another way we really actively work to support our unaccompanied youth is through a very long list of community-wide partnerships. I have led an entire session at our statewide conference about what that can look like, developing community partnerships and their potential outcome. And the reason I did that session is because I so passionately believe that the work that we're trying to do for all of our MVP students, but especially our unaccompanied youth, is given like new breath through these community partnerships. The beauty of them is that they're not tied directly to grant requirements. And so they can be out of the box, they can be above and beyond, and they can be really student-centered in a way that addresses the whole child. Yes, some of them do have academic outcomes, but more often than not, they are building self-confidence, positive mental health, and just feelings of joy and just letting kids be kids. And so that's where we find the beauty and the importance of these projects. We also know that when those things are all elevated, students' attendance and retention kind of naturally enhance as well. And so just a few examples that we wanted to share with you of projects that we have been involved in. The bigger bottom left picture is a picture of our local Realtors Association. And so for almost a decade now, they have done a project specifically for our unaccompanied youth. Nicole and I individually interview every one of the students that are participating in this and get an individual wish list of things that the children want or need, which, as you can imagine, working with unaccompanied youth, that's really hard for them to identify sometimes what it is that they want because they're not normally asked that. It's kind of like whatever's left over sometimes is just what they're getting. And so, but the realtors are beautiful about honoring that. We have basics like shoes and snacks and headphones that are given, but also winter studded tires and batteries for vehicles, ukuleles. 2 years ago, a realtor actually bought one of our youth a plane ticket from Alaska to Florida to visit her grandparent. And so it's just a beautiful project. They love it. I think this will be our 10th year this coming Christmas in supporting these youth. The second picture is $2,500 worth of food cards that a local builder trust business gave to us when they found out how nutritional inconsistency is such a concern for our youth. And then the top picture is me with the president of another local nonprofit on the Kenai Peninsula who works to support hundreds of kids every year with holiday gifts. And that's him donating to us a new bicycle and a new bed for 2 of our unaccompanied youth. And so if anybody in the future wants ideas or needs any help with figuring out how community partnerships can play into the work you're doing with students in your area, I'd be happy to follow up with you. It's probably one of the things that I find most beneficial in all of the work that we do for unaccompanied youth is letting the community build in. We have found that often so many people in our communities want to help and they want to give, but they don't know what to do. And so the more that we inform them about the needs of our students, the more likely they are to step up. I will say that we've never once initiated or solicited for one of these partnerships. People have found out what we're doing, and then we're able to have that dialogue with them and share information, and they've always come to us. And so I think that potential exists wherever you are in the country, but it's just really using your voice to be the voice of your students and to build into their community. The last thing I'll say before I pass it back over to Nicole is that when we're talking about percentages of homeless unaccompanied youth in our districts, through the intentional identification kind of boost work that we've been doing last year for our caseload, 26% of our caseload were unaccompanied youth. And so I think that really speaks to the output of the energy that we are putting in this awareness and identification component and how impactful that can be to the numbers that you're seeing with your students.
Thanks. So CTE, exposure to career and technical education opportunities, is huge for our youth. And to make sure students that are homeless unaccompanied youth don't miss out, Kelly and I both serve on our district CTE steering committee. And twice a year, we tour programs, review data, and plan for future partnerships. We've really worked hard to build the strong relationship with our CTE coordinator, and that connection really helps us be proactive. Make sure that when camps or events are coming up, that our youth aren't left behind. We can help cover transportation, fees, supplies, and nutritional support, just like we would for other students involved in extracurriculars. So as you can imagine, when there's different camps taking place, they might need a cot, pillows, sleeping bag. And so this allows us, we can be proactive, the opportunity to go and shop for them ahead of time. The impact of these students being engaged in this is very real. One of our young women who graduated high school, she did so with her CNA, and she had job offers from multiple hospitals. And by the age of 23, she had purchased her own home. Fun fact, I currently do not even own my own home. So that's just a big thing I love to share and boast about when we're talking about her. Kelly spoke to you guys a lot today, and I really just want to take a moment to highlight her. Any district in the state would be lucky to have her, and our district is especially fortunate. She really saw a need where schools are struggling to reconnect with homeless unaccompanied youth, and after summer, unaccompanied youth, especially after summer break. And so really out of her vision, my role was created, and that's to provide consistent positive connections with students during breaks and throughout the year. I personally get to work with students in so many ways, which I love, introducing them to healthy activities like biking, hiking, or yoga, helping them develop or strengthen life skills, such as cooking, money budgeting, or filling out job applications, and then connecting them with community by taking them to local businesses or events. Now, before school starts and during the year, if they're a student I meet during the year, I walk students through their new building, help them find classes and lockers, and I introduce them to staff. Kind of like Karen was talking about, doing that handoff and walking them to and getting them that connection, I feel is very important. When I'm having them meet staff, I always ask those students who they feel most comfortable with. And then I talk to the staff that they have identified as a trusted adult. And I let that adult know, like, hey, this young person's identified you to lean on. I'm very, very proud and grateful to be a support for those homeless unaccompanied youth, but especially as Kelly's talked about with the 42 schools that we have and how vast the distance is between them. I know that I cannot always be on site, and I know it's very critical that every student that we have that's a homeless unaccompanied youth has a trusted adult in their own school, and who knows and can help them advocate while I help them find their own confidence in advocating for themselves. Thank you. In an effort to help our students transition to post-secondary, one of the most exciting experiences we offer is the Juneau trip. And since Juneau, if you don't know this, Juneau is the state capital of Alaska. But Juneau is I just said that. And students get to go and visit our UAS main campus and the CTE campus. They get to meet legislators, sit on sessions at the Capitol, and explore museums and Alaska history. As I'm sure most of you know, the majority of our homeless unaccompanied youth have endured significant trauma. We keep students' trips intentionally small, around 10 to 12 max, with this knowledge in mind to help prioritize the depth of connection over just numbers served. Most of our youth have not experienced life beyond the Central Peninsula or traveled by plane, and the time leading up to this and during the trip can produce a lot of anxiety. The UAS campus is smaller and therefore less overwhelming than larger universities. And for this reason, as for many others that we mentioned, is why we choose the University of Alaska Southeast. When we talk about the barriers that are presented, normally school trips require a parent or guardian signature, which is sorry, let me go back. Normally our school trips require parent or guardian signature, and that's a barrier for our homeless unaccompanied youth. But through the McKinney-Vento, they're able to sign their own paperwork so they can fully participate. Instead of fundraising for our students, I sit down with each of them and set attainable attendance and academic goals that they agree to. If they meet them, the trip is fully covered and it's a reward and a motivator. And the experiences are powerful. Students have seen cultural art like canoe paddles, carving, toured dorms, watched welding and carpentry demonstrations, and even had time for recreation at the on-campus lake. And so the pictures that you see here on the slide are from our trips and the things that we just mentioned. We partner with Title IV funds to make these immersive, well-rounded trips possible. A major goal of these on-site visits is connection. We really want youth to leave with real names, faces, and resources that they can lean on later. At the high school level, that means that we're working closely with counselors to make sure the FAFSA forms are completed. At the university level, we connect them directly with financial aid staff so they don't feel like strangers when they need support. We also introduce them to academic advisors who can answer questions about programs, degrees versus endorsements, and even student employment opportunities. For us, it's about making sure they don't just visit a campus, but that they start building their network of support. Thanks. We also know that school is only a part of the story, so we show students what community looks like. That includes arts and culture, visiting the State of Alaska Museum, checking out events and music, theater, or recreation. It also means getting practical, looking at the layout of Juneau, how it's spread out, and how transportation might affect their decision to live on or off campus. And we point out where key services are in relation to the campus. That way the youth can actually imagine their life outside the classroom and not just inside it. Thank you guys very much for letting us share here today. Supporting homeless and unaccompanied youth is challenging work, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And we really hope these stories, examples, give you a picture of the impact this program can have and the importance of strong partnerships to make it all possible.
Well, thank you so much. I want to toss a question to you, actually, that has come up in the Q&A box. It's come up in the chat. And I know that this is something that you all do exceptionally well. Wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you connect with your community partners and kind of how you get that process going to really leverage those partnerships.
Sorry. Yeah, kind of a multifaceted answer. So we are present as much as we possibly can be in our community. And so if middle school is hosting a suicide prevention fun run, we're there. People know that we're there with this program. If any entity in the community asks us to come speak to their staff, we do. Nicole and I are both representatives on a lot of community children's team meetings or things like that happen where any child-centered service provider, we have monthly meetings in our area, so we sit on that. And we try and be as involved in the community as possible. And so naturally, I think a lot of those partnerships develop through those conversations that we have. We're also very active in things like school board meetings. And this kind of speaks, Karen, to another point that you were making about policy. Our school board and our superintendent very much know who we are and what we do and what we offer to students. We've spoken at school board meetings. And so last year we had to rewrite policy for homeless education. And with our board being familiar with what we are, we did have a seat at that table where I actually was the one who was helping edit that policy for our school district and helping it along the approval process. So not to swirl with my answer, but I just think the more that you're naturally talking about your role and the more that you're kind of embedding into these other things outside of the just day-to-day district, you're naturally going to have people who are really excited and passionate about what you're doing, and they're going to ask how they can help.
Thank you so much. I want to just add one quick note about that. If you have never thought about how you really talk about your program, we have a resource on our website about crafting an elevator pitch. And if you're not familiar with the term elevator pitch, it's just a kind of quick 60 to 90 second way that you can talk about your program, how you can really what's the word I'm looking for? Tailor that kind of pitch that you're making to either your community partners or to your partners within your LEA. I will post that link in the chat, but just to get you thinking as you're thinking about, you know, what do I say to people in my community? How do I really work with folks? What do I ask? What do I share? What does that look like? That elevator pitch resource is something that can help you get the ball rolling on how to do that.
Karen, can I add another idea?
Yeah.
social media, it's what everyone's using, youth, community members, it doesn't matter at this point. And so if you don't already have a dedicated social media account for your McKinney-Vento program, run it through your district and make sure you can, but I would highly encourage it. We have a relatively small community compared to many of the places where people tuning in are living, but we have, I think, almost 900 followers. And then when we share things and they share out, it's reaching thousands of people with events that are coming up, with projects that we're working on. And so that's really important. Another thing to consider when we talk about community partnerships, we talk with a lot of districts who don't have dedicated donations accounts with their finance departments in their school district. And so if you don't, and you want to start building out community partnerships, I would talk with your finance department to make sure you have that dedicated account so that people who are doing fundraising projects for you or have donations to write have a place for that to go, where it's easily already set up and separated within your finance department to come to you and your kids. Again, the things you're able to do with the flexibility of those funds is so impactful. And so really would encourage districts who aren't utilizing that already to really like have that be a step that you guys are looking into.
Excellent. An excellent suggestion. I will also put in a plug for education foundations. If your LEA has an education foundation, they can be a really excellent partner in that as well. Kelly and Nicole, one more question that has come up in the Q&A box about 4 times. This is an easy one. How many McKinney-Vento students do you have in your LEA?
Our average is around 250 students per year. I will tell you, Karen and Anna Sophia and I were talking before this presentation started. We're only on like day 16 of our school year, and we already have 105 students identified. So we've seen a pretty drastic increase for this point in the year. And so we're well expecting to probably be over 350 this year. And so I'm going to scroll again, and I'm sorry, but an easy thing to start with in your communities for connection, because they're looking for things to support. If you have Rotary clubs, we have many in our community for each little town that we're in, but that's a really good place to start, is invite yourself to a Rotary club meeting. Ask if you can be a guest, ask if you can speak to those things. But those kind of social service clubs, they're actively wanting to support. Yes, Kiwanis is another one. I saw someone just drop in the chat, but whatever you have in your community that is along those lines, it's a great place to start for you. So apologize for all the squirreling, but things are just like coming to my mind as we're talking.
Excellent recommendation, so no need to apologize.
Okay. I will wrap us up. I have the sad task of closing us out here because I know that we could probably stay here for like a whole nother hour because there's a lot of questions. I want to just reiterate, thank you both so much. If you haven't already seen the chat, people are outpouring just how much they love what you're doing. They can see your passion. And we're just really grateful that you're here in the space with us. People want to see your flyers. People want to know everything. You have a lot of fans after this. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm going to go ahead and just close this out with a couple of last minute things, and then you can all have the rest of your day back. So just a couple of pieces. I did see a lot of questions in the chat about public benefits, access to routine medical care, all these kinds of things. And I want to remind folks that we do have some resources on our website, specifically state laws around routine medical care for minors. We also have a lovely state policy team who I know would be more than happy to talk to any of you with any of those questions. Please reach out to us via our contact form, and we're happy to address those specifics. And again, these are all of our resources, so encourage you to take a look at that. You've already heard about how important it is to customize your resources, and so this is a baseline, but you can always do more around that piece as well. And as you all heard from the top of the webinar, this is part 2 of our 4-part Back to School series, and we'll be back at this time next week to talk about transportation for students experiencing homelessness. I saw some questions in the chat about that, so please be sure to come back. We'll talk about all those nuances, and then in October, we'll be back to talk about determining McKinney-Vento eligibility. This is Karen and I's contact information. I will make sure that you have all of our panelists' contact information when you get the follow-up for today's session, but just know that we are here for you to answer any questions we might not have gotten to today. And last but not least, I talked about this in the beginning, but just please be sure to sign up for our newsletter if you want to stay up to date about legislative updates, resources, webinar announcements, or anything else that's coming down from Schoolhouse Connection. Please be sure to use that QR code and sign up for our newsletter. And with that, just want to thank you all again for your time today. Again, thank you so much to the folks in the Kenai School District for really being here with us today. And I hope you all have a lovely day.